Behind the Guitar is brought to you by the Martin Guitar Foundation, RCN, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Recorded live from the campus of Steel Stacks in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. Ladies and gentlemen, our host, Craig Thatcher.
Welcome to Behind the Guitar. I'm your host, Craig Thatcher. Behind the Guitar is a musical performance series which features guitarists and composers as they tell the stories, the meanings, and the memories behind their work. Today we'll be sitting down with two-time Grammy winner, world-renowned guitar virtuoso, and internationally known lead guitarist of Paul McCartney and Wings, Laurence Juber. Please put your hands together as we go behind the guitar with Laurence Juber. I'd like to say one thing from Laurence's website. I'll take a quote. Weaving in and out of musical thoughts faster than a Formula One racer, from the San Diego Reader. How true that is.
And I don't get a speeding ticket.
Oh. So you grew up in England. Well, you're from London?
From London, yeah.
And your early influences?
Well, our big one in England that really influenced everybody was a guitarist named Hank Marvin, who was the lead guitarist for the Shadows, Cliff Richard's backing group, also an instrumental group. And he had a red Stratocaster and Buddy Holly-style glasses, and he was just so cool. And they had all these cool, like, dance moves when they were playing, you know, and it was... And then, of course, the Beatles came along, and that changed everything.
Oh, totally agree.
But it wasn't just the Beatles. It was the Rolling Stones and the Animals. And then, you know, as it developed during my early teens, you know, culminating in, you know, 1967, Jimi Hendrix and, you know, Sgt. Pepper album comes out. And they say that what you listen to when you're 14 and a half is the stuff that really imprints. And that was, you know, June 1967. So Disraeli Gears,
Oh, yes.
Are You Experienced, Sgt. Pepper, it was all happening in that. But my influences were also on the jazz side, on the classical side. So it was pretty eclectic.
And you studied some classical guitar?
I did, because I wanted to study music.
I see.
And I took some private lessons to begin with, and I taught myself a lot. And then in high school, they had a classical guitar teacher come in, and I jumped at that. My dad wanted me to play the saxophone.
Ah.
So, you know, I said, okay, I'll learn the clarinet. And I made sure to put my name at the bottom of the list. So they ran out of clarinets before they ever got to me.
Well, the classical training, I'm sure it really helped you develop your right-hand technique.
It did, up to a point. I mean, I had to kind of go beyond classical for the way that I use my right hand, because I don't play with fingernails, and there's a different approach going on. I do percussive stuff, I do altered tuning stuff, so it doesn't work in the strict classical realm. But what it did do was gave me a context for being self-sufficient on the acoustic guitar, which was the thing that most excited me, was going to folk clubs and seeing somebody like Martin Carthy, who could stand there with one guitar, no PA, and fill a room.
Amazing.
Yeah, and how cool is that?
That
I
is
want to
so
do
cool.
that. But then I also wanted to be a studio musician and basically play like Eric Clapton. So, you know, and you can relate to that.
Well, I can relate to just about everything you're saying here, yes.
Yeah.
We certainly grew up in a similar time frame, and this side of the pond, same influences. And the way it progressed was very, very similar. Yeah. Why don't you play us another song?
Okay. Well, one of my other kind of influences as a teenager was ragtime. I was a big fan of it, especially like Stefan Grossman.
Oh, yes.
Kind of turned me on to that. And it was also something that you'd see in the folk clubs. And this is a tune called Fingerboard Road, which I found was it's actually a freeway off-ramp when driving through Staten Island going to JFK Airport.
Oh, yeah.
And I just thought that's such a great metaphor for
Certainly
what, you know,
is.
for what I do. Is I've spent 50 years living on Fingerboard Road, you know, right here.
You're still there. I got to read you one more quote from Guitar Player magazine, which I've been reading since the 60s when it was about 40 pages thick, very thin little magazine. Today it must be 150 or more. But from your bio page, melodies and textures and harmonics coaxed out of a guitar are absolutely spellbinding, and I couldn't agree with that more. Just wonderful, your sense of composition and the way you execute it and make it work. We were talking about the fact that you're looking at it on a more vertical plane rather than a horizontal plane, and you're mixing the voices of the orchestra.
Yeah, I think if you take a vertical slice at any one moment, there's various different levels. I just go for the dimension, trying to, like, melody, bass, rhythm, and texture, and how they all converge. Now, of course, there's the linear aspect. You know, you have to write a nice tune.
Sure.
You have to have the groove, and you have to have all those, you know, those musical elements. And I really consider myself a musician who plays the guitar. And I'm a terrible piano player. So all those things that would be here, you know, the left hand, right hand stuff, I'm really trying to coax out of the instrument itself. So that's kind of the challenge artistically,
Sure.
is to write a good tune, find how it works on the guitar, and not just original compositions, but also arrangements too.
And then be able to execute it.
Yeah, that's and perform, because it's one thing to play.
Right.
It's another thing to actually be able to perform, and you know, over the years I've learned a great deal about, you know, just being an entertainer too,
Certainly.
which was never my ambition. My ambition was to be a studio musician.
So your ambition to be a studio musician, did that start early on? And this is all prior to the Paul McCartney and Wings? How
Way
did this evolve?
I started at 11. Age 13, I realized that I could make a living as a musician, as a guitar player, and being a studio player was kind of the goal. And it, you know, I started playing. A local band leader kind of adopted me musically, and I was playing weddings and, you know, kind of corporate things, and it was a hell of a lot better than babysitting and working at the supermarket on Saturdays. And I got paid more, and I was doing what I loved to do. So everything in my teen years was oriented towards becoming a studio player. And once I got through college, that's what I did. I went straight into studio work. And for example, one of my great ambitions was to be able to play the James Bond theme.
Oh,
you know,
sure.
And in 1977, I played on the score of The Spy Who Loved Me, playing the James Bond theme. So I got to fulfill ambitions with it. And then when I was asked to join Wings, that fulfilled another ambition, which was, you know, you daydream about, you know, wouldn't it be great to play with the Beatles? And I got to play with 3 out of 4.
We have the 6th Beatle on stage with us. That is just amazing. So can you go into just a little bit about what it was like working with Paul McCartney?
It was an amazing experience. It was an education. I mean, I think of it as getting my master's from McCartney University, you know, because this is somebody, not only, you know, the pop star part of it, you know, not the fact that he was a Beatle, but an artist, a composer, a producer, all just the mechanism of the music business, you know, music publishing even I learned about, because he's a very successful music publisher.
He certainly is.
Yeah, and it was a challenge. You know, when you're sitting in a studio like this with Paul McCartney and you have to come up with the cool guitar licks, you know, and you know, I had kind of some very big shoes to fill.
Could be quite daunting, I'm sure.
But you know, you kind of you get on the edge. You kind of, that's where the creativity comes from, is that bleeding edge.
And you were certainly up to the task. Why don't you play us one more song from Fingerboard Road?
Sure. This actually is a bonus track on the album, and it's a romantic moment. It's called Love at First Sight, and it's true. You know, there's a moment in time that it captures.
Before we go to internationally renowned guitar expert and good friend of both of ours, Mr. Dick Boak, I just want to ask you one quick question
Sure.
about your tuning, the
Okay.
Dad-Gad tuning.
Dad-Gad tuning, D-A-D-G-A-D.
So this developed in the early 1960s, late 50s, early 60s?
Yeah, Davy Graham, a British guitar player, really developed it for doing kind of drone tuning type stuff so he could jam with Moroccan musicians. And there is some theory that maybe it goes back to a banjo tuning too. But, so there may be earlier examples of it, but the history of it really kind of starts with Davy Graham. And became very popular amongst English guitar players in the folk world, also in the rock world. Jimmy Page used
sure.
like Kashmir, for example.
Sure. You certainly are the master of Dad-Gad tuning.
Thank you.
Among other things. Let's turn over to Dick now, and Dick is going to explain a bit about your selection of tone woods and body size and so on and so forth.
So guitar players have a lot of different choices, different sizes and shapes of guitars. Laurence gravitated toward what we would refer to, and what Laurence refers to, as a performance guitar. This has a cutaway, of course. A cutaway removes a little bit of wood. It doesn't have too much effect on the tone, but it gives the player, a professional player like Laurence, more access to the upper notes to be able to play leads up in here. All of Laurence's guitars are very plain. It's not about pizzazz at all. It's about tone. So we've chosen very specific tone wood. This is Adirondack spruce, which has a complexity of tone that's hard to get anywhere else. And then in the format of this specific size and shape, which you can see is a smaller size, not as deep as a dreadnought, very balanced in tone. We've experimented with Laurence on a number of different models that have different combinations of tone woods. This particular one is mahogany. Mahogany has a bright, clear treble. We've built several models with different varieties of rosewood, which have deep, warm bass response. The guitar that Laurence is playing on stage is made of Hawaiian koa, which kind of falls between rosewood and mahogany in its tone response. Laurence and I have been collaborating for a long time, and Laurence came up with this great way of describing the tones according to different types of wine. And Laurence, you want to share some of your sommelier guitar player comments?
Well, it's just like the mahogany is kind of like Chardonnay, and rosewood is more like Indian rosewood, maybe like a Merlot, and Brazilian rosewood, which is kind of the holy grail of guitar woods, would be like, you know, a fine Cabernet. And then you go to maple, which is more like vodka, you know, get into the spirit. Because it's very pure. It doesn't really color the sound of the top very much. I like to think of koa as actually more in the single malt Scotch area. You know, Dick maybe thinks of it more as champagne-like. So we have a slight disagreement about that.
Well, it's certainly a great, great honor for me to be friends with Laurence for so many years and to have had the opportunity to collaborate with him on so many different guitar models.
Why don't you share one more song with us?
Oh, you bet.
Juber. Laurence, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Such an honor to have you on the show. Thank you all for coming. And until next time, from Behind the Guitar, I'm Craig Thatcher. Thank you so much.